2005, a year that marks significant moments in history, culture, and technology. From devastating natural disasters to controversial legal cases, 2005 had it all. It was a year that helped set the stage for so much of what we know today. In this video, we're diving into some of the most pivotal events that shaped this unforgettable year. To start this year off, one of the most significant global agreements in the fight against climate change came into full effect. The Kyoto Protocol, an international treaty aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions, entered force on February 16, 2005. It committed industrialized nations to reducing their carbon emissions over a commitment period until 2012 and was a major step toward addressing the growing threat of global warming. Despite not including the U.S., the Kyoto Protocol set a precedent for future climate agreements and brought hope that these issues were being solved.
So what I remember about the Kyoto Protocols was that it was an early indication of governments wanting to do something about the climate. And I think that nowadays we hear so much about climate change and government involvement and human beings' responsibility for that. But 20 years ago, it was still sort of a novel idea. I mean, not completely. People have been talking about the environment for a long time. But to imagine that countries, and there's a lot of countries, came together and tried to set some standards to follow I think there was a hint of optimism to it. I remember thinking at the time, like, okay, maybe this might get something done. Maybe now that it's become more official, solutions could be found. So there's a hopefulness to it. Now, it did spawn other initiatives that have come about and hopefully inspired some of those. But it's a good way to show that, something hopeful can motivate action, but usually or seldom is it something that kind of like just defeats it in one kind of go. So
2005 also saw the birth of something that would change the way the world consumed and shared media forever. Founded by three former PayPal employees, Chad Hurley, Steve Chen, and Jawed Karim, YouTube was also launched in February of that year. Originally created as a platform for users to upload and share videos, it became the go-to site for viral clips to full-length shows. Although it had a slow start, YouTube had become a cultural phenomenon by the end of the year. It is now one of the most used and prevalent websites around the world.
Or when I think watching videos online, it's YouTube, right? Obviously, there's other places to do it. But when it came out in 2005, unlike some like social media sites, like say Twitter or something, where it's like, oh, like what's the big deal with Twitter, right? But YouTube, I think the appeal was immediate. And I remember in the early days of YouTube, it was sort of still a Wild West kind of thing. I mean, there's so many protections in place and guardrails, many for good reason these days. But back then, like anybody could upload anything. It had this very kind of raw feel to it. There are a lot of videos that I think are like classics in my mind that I discovered on YouTube that, kind of early since like almost like a meme, but that hadn't developed to that point yet. But you could, I remember like my friends posting videos and sharing them on there, and it felt like we were living like in the future where you could exchange videos online. So it was really exciting. I think from the get-go, seemed really cool. We've seen 20 years later, the potential of YouTube. I mean, it's like, so prevalent online. So it's really cool to see how it's developed. But one of those things that the appeal was readily available. And I think it's easy to see why it's become so popular.
Moving on to a much sadder topic. One of the most heartbreaking and controversial cases of 2005 was the case of Terri Schiavo, a woman at the center of a fierce legal and public battle over life support. Schiavo had been in a persistent vegetative state for over 15 years after suffering a cardiac arrest in 1990. And her husband, Michael Schiavo, sought to have her life support removed, believing she would not have wanted to live in such a condition. However, Schiavo's parents vehemently opposed his decision, insisting that her daughter could still recover, and argued that her feeding tube should not be removed. The case drew national attention, and ultimately, her feeding tube was removed, leading to her death on March 31st. The situation sparked intense debates about medical ethics and religious morality.
It caused me to do a little soul searching, because as much as, I could see both sides of the argument. I understand he doesn't want his wife to suffer anymore, but the parents don't want to let their daughter die. So, it's one of those horrible Sophie's choices. But I think the way, it came down to, in this country, when we have differing views and differing opinions and beliefs, legally somebody has to be able to make the call. I wasn't excited about the way it played out, but I did appreciate that we have a system that's kind of set up for when we are in those situations where it's just a matter of two faiths that disagree, that are on the wrong side of an issue. It was kind of disheartening to see that we could work through that, but it was a brilliant expression, and there was a lot of publicity from the bishops in America about what we believe as Catholics and how important it is to protect life. So.
Continuing to another sad story, the world lost one of the most influential and beloved figures in modern history, Pope John Paul II. After a long battle with illness, the Pope passed away on April 2nd, 2005 at the age of 84. Having served as the leader of the Roman Catholic Church for nearly 27 years, John Paul II was a transformative figure, not only in religious matters, but also in politics and social change. Known for his role in bringing down communism in Eastern Europe, his advocacy for human rights, and his ability to connect with people from all walks of life, his death marked the end of an era. His death affected millions of mourners, as he was known for being the only pope people experienced. These people gathered from around the world in Vatican City for his funeral to commemorate and honor the long-lasting effect he had on them.
For the first time in my life, the church was going to be led by somebody new. This is also going to happen when Pope Francis is no longer Pope, whether he steps down or he dies himself. The next thing for all Catholics to consider is, well, who are the cardinals going to elect next, and what is that next phase of the church going to look like? And so it was filled, I think, this moment for the church, because Pope John Paul II had been Pope for so long. I think there was some anxiety about what that might look like, but also some intrigue and maybe some hopefulness if people were looking for something different. And so it was an interesting time. Then you had this window before a new Pope was elected where those were the two reflections. Looking back on Pope John Paul II's legacy, and also what does this mean for the church moving forward.
Later that year, the city of London, known for its vibrancy, diversity, and resilience, was forever changed by an attack that would leave a deep scar on its history. On the morning of July 7th, 2005, London became the target of one of the deadliest terrorist attacks the city had ever seen. As commuters began their day, the city's iconic underground system became the setting for a tragedy that would claim the lives of 52 innocent people, leaving hundreds more injured. At 8:50 a.m., 4 bombers boarded different trains on the London Underground. In a coordinated attack, they detonated bombs within minutes of each other on 3 trains traveling through the city's heart. The bombers were identified as Mohammed Sadiq Khan, Shahzad Tanwir, Hasib Hussein, and Jermaine Lindsay. Listen to Ms. Davis's shocking testimony and her first-hand experience at the London bombings.
We're working for a psychic. She calls us in and she's like, hey, I got a really bad feeling about your trip to London, which of course in my mom's worst fear. And we're like what? Like what, Janet? What's your feet? What about it? She's like, are you guys in seat 7, row 7 on the plane? And we're like, have you never flown before? Like, that's not how this works. Like, it's row, whatever, seat A, B, C, D, E, F. She's like, well, are you in seat 77? And I'm like, what? That doesn't make any sense. She's like, I don't know. I got a real bad feeling. It's about 7-7. It's connected to this London trip. Like, I don't like it. It feels really like there's something off. Like, I just need you guys to be really, really careful. So we left to go to London on July 6th from the United States. And our flight was delayed. So we ended up landing in London on the morning of July 7th. And so we get off the plane. We've already made contact with him. He's on my brother-in-law now. He's on his way to pick us up from the airport. By the time we go through customs and all those things, when we go to get on the tube to go to his place, there's a giant sign there that says it's been shut down due to an electrical malfunction. We go eat at McDonald's, figuring by the time we get out of eating, the train will be reopened. We'll be able to get to his house. It's not. It's not going to reopen at all because it's a terrorist attack. Finally, around, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we ended up in a pub somewhere. And that's when BBC News is like, more breaking on the terrorist attack. And we're like, oh my God. And that's when we then put together that July 7th is in fact 7-7. And we're in this London trip, and we're like, oh my God, Janet is a genius, right? She's such a good psychic. 7-7, are you freaking kidding? And of course, right, then we're like, oh my God, we gotta call my mom, because she probably thinks we're dead right now. We could not get in touch with her till almost 9 o'clock at night. That's when we finally got in touch with her to be like, we're fine. We didn't get on the tube. We were delayed. We ended up at McDonald's. We told her the whole story. And we could hear, she just crumpled into a ball, I think. If we had been here, I would have seen her, crumple into a ball, crying that we were safe. That said, that was the start of the most boring London trip of all time because you couldn't do anything. Everything was shut down the entire time we were there, right? And a couple days later, there was a second bombing on the bus, the double-decker bus outside of King's Crossing, which is not far from the neighborhood he lives in. So we did nothing the entire trip. Nothing. You couldn't go to museums. You couldn't go to see the London Tower of London. You couldn't go to Buckingham Palace. Nothing. All of our plans canceled. And I guess it worked out because that actually forced my sister and this guy to do nothing but talk to each other and realize that they actually do like each other and he's not a bad dude. And now they're married and now they have 2 kids. So I guess that worked out. But what a crazy, crazy, crazy trip.
The final event that we'll be covering in 2005 is the devastating storm of unimaginable power and destruction that was brewing in the Gulf of Mexico, Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina, a Category 5 monster, quickly intensified as it made its way toward the Gulf Coast. As residents of New Orleans and surrounding areas braced for impact, no one could have predicted the catastrophic events that would follow. On August 29, 2005, Katrina made landfall, bringing with it 140-mile-per-hour winds, torrential rain, and an enormous storm surge. But it wasn't just the winds that would devastate New Orleans. It was the levees that were meant to protect the city. In the chaos that followed, families were separated, and many struggled to survive without food, water, or power. The federal government's response to the disaster was widely criticized. Thousands of people were stranded in the Superdome and Convention Center, waiting for help that seemed to come too slowly.
August 29, 2005 was when Hurricane Katrina made landfall. And I remember at the time, that was prior to my wife and I getting married. We were on a date in New Orleans. It had to have been maybe a day or two before that, before landfall happened. And I remember we went out that night, we walked around New Orleans, we hung out for a while, and we drove back that night and we went to the store. And when we got to the store, I remember the shelves were empty of all the stuff you would expect to need for hurricane prep. And we had not heard about it because we were out of town on this date. And originally, Katrina was supposed to go towards Florida, I think, but it shifted towards New Orleans like the last second. And when we saw that the shelves were empty, we started asking people, what's going on, why, and somebody said, you don't know about the hurricane that's coming? And so it was a scary feeling because you feel the anxiety, you feel the energy of all the people in the panic that they were feeling. And I remember my brother-in-law my future brother-in-law had to go to New Orleans because he had a lot of his, he was in a band and he had a lot of his equipment in New Orleans. He had to go get it. And he had to go after the hurricane hit. I think that's how it happened, but it took him forever to get back into New Orleans because everybody evacuated and there was so much chaos in New Orleans, he could not get his equipment right away. Just devastation. I remember watching the news, watching the TV, the live feed from CNN and from ABC, CBS, and Fox News, and just all the chaos, the people in the streets, the news reports that were coming out. We didn't know what was true, what wasn't true. There was rumors of a firefight between New Orleanians and police, and people being assaulted in the Memorial Convention Center. People were in the Superdome for days at a time. The plumbing was backed up and wasn't working. And on top of that, so many lives were lost as a result of what I thought was a slow response from the federal government. But I mean, what do I know? It was a scary time. It let me really know what happens when people are under pressure and what happens when disaster strikes. How do people react to those things? Do we pull together or do we fight each other? And I think the answer is some of us pull together and some of us fight.
Thank you for joining me on the journey that was 2005. The stories of resilience, strength, and unity remind us of the power we all have to overcome even the most difficult challenges.